Um, okay.
We're recording.
All right, well, we do have a quorum here, so I will call the meeting of the Nantucket Historical Commission to order. I want to take a minute just to say that we do have some people on the commission who are trying to join who are having difficulty. We may also have people in the public who are trying to join who might be having difficulty, a technical difficulty, being told it's an internal meeting. There is a dial-in number listed on the website which should give you phone access and allow you to participate with audio. That being said, I might, if I get some texts from people wanting to know how to join, I'm going to go ahead and answer them. I'll let everybody on the video know what I'm doing. But we are calling the meeting to order. And I do also want to say that this meeting is being recorded. It's not being broadcast live, but it will be posted on the town website afterwards. And it is an open meeting, so we might have people joining at different points in the meeting. There is a preamble here that I need to read because Governor Baker has asked us to read it. I'm just going to pull that up. You just give me a minute. Sorry about this. Okay. All right, so this is a meeting of the Nantucket Historical Commission. I'm Hillary Hedges-Rayford, I'm chair of the commission, and we also have Kelly Bacchus, who is the Nantucket Preservation Planner and our liaison with the town of Nantucket. I want to confirm that everybody who is anticipated to be on the agenda is present and can hear me. So the members, when I call your name, if you can just respond in the affirmative. So we are having second Jerky's.
Here, I can hear you.
Great. Angus McLeod.
Has to unmute.
I think Angus might not yet be corrected. Angus? I did suggest to Angus that he dial in, so hopefully he'll join shortly. Tom Montgomery?
Present.
Georgia Raisman?
Present.
Mickey Rowland?
I'm here on the phone.
Great. David Silver?
Present as well. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Ben Normand?
Here.
And Don DeMichelle?
Here.
Great. And David is our secretary and will be taking minutes of the meeting.
Angus is here.
Okay.
By phone.
Oh, great. Angus, glad you're here now. Now, we also have some guests. We have Jeff Paddock here as a guest. Jeff, can you hear me and everything? Yep. Okay.
Yep, I'm here.
And I also see Mary Bergman from the Nantucket Preservation Trust.
Hello.
And I just admitted Rita Carr from the Nantucket Preservation Trust. Rita, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Okay. And I'm also expecting Marty Hilton. Marty is not here, but may join shortly. And we also have some other members of the public who are participating and listening. If anybody wants to make a comment, you can use the chat. You can raise your hand and if it's appropriate in the agenda, I will of course call on you, or Holly will call on you to make a comment. This open meeting of the Nantucket Historical Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's Executive Order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency of the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the rules of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. And this meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Historical Commission is convening by video conference. Sorry, I just have my screen taken over and I lost my script. And it's what the fact that we're meeting by video conference is posted on the website. The meeting's being recorded. All attendees are participating by either video conference or phone. So please be aware that other folks can see you, and be careful not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by this recording. Holly, are we controlling who can screen share? I think we are, correct? Holly?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I'm the one that's screen sharing at the moment.
Okay, so if you have something on your computer that would be helpful to share, you can ask Holly for permission. So all supporting materials that have been provided are available on the town's website. We did receive a letter from Jeff Paddock, which has been, which we'll share on the screen. Public can follow along using the agenda unless we note otherwise. So we're turning to the beginning of the agenda. I just want to cover some ground rules. I'll introduce any speakers as the chair. I'll introduce the speakers after they conclude the remarks. We'll go down to poll the members of the commission asking for any comment questions. So of course you can raise your hand, but I will try to keep a call on everyone. So please mute your phone or your computer when you're not speaking. Please speak clearly. If we can't hear you, we'll let you know. And if you have a response, please wait until we yield the floor. So we'll try to have an orderly meeting here. And if we have to take any votes, we will take them by roll call. Okay? So the first item on the agenda is the establishment of the quorum. We do have a quorum. And now I'll ask everyone to mute their phone. Just be sure that they're muted. And I'll ask if there's any public comment. Is there any public comment? I don't hear any public comment. So now I'll go ahead and ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the February 24th meeting. I do have one change in the minutes of the meeting that I noticed. Ben Norman's name is spelled with a D. So we'll be sure to add that his name has a D on the end. I apologize for that. Then does anyone else have any comments on the meeting, on the minutes?
I was also present. Clement
Okay.
Durkee was also present.
Clement listed as the commissioner's present. Sorry about that, Clement. Okay. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes? Anyone?
Angus makes motion.
Okay, Angus, and by roll call, all in favor, Clement?
Aye.
I'm gonna unmute everybody. Tom? Tom, could I have a yay or nay on approving the minutes?
He's muted.
Sorry, I'm muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes? Yep. Georgia?
Approved.
Mickey?
Yeah.
and David.
Yes.
And I'm Hillary in favor of the minutes. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start the meeting with an update from the staff and an update from the chair. So Holly, why don't you let us know what's going on with the training and other things happening for the world.
Okay. So on the agenda, you have the MVP, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grants. Those are the design guidelines. Just let the commission know that even though we've been closed to the public, and of course there were quite a few weeks there that town staff were not working, there was a lot of us working remotely. And through that time, I have been involved with conversations, meetings, what have you, with our consultants for our design guidelines. Of course, our time frame has been pushed back. We were obviously supposed to have those design guidelines pretty much approved with the state by June of this year. Obviously, that's not happening. We got an extension through MVP, so it'll be until next June. So that's great. We can get the ball rolling, and we're kicking that off with our consultants. We plan on working with obviously the consultants as well as PIN and NPT, and we'll be well, obviously won't be having the design guidelines finally approved, now. So we're kind of working on that. It pushes everything towards the fall. The next thing is training. The camp training that I was working with the National Alliance of Preservation Commissioners, that was obviously supposed to happen this past month. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we couldn't have that. So I've actually just received a response back from the executive director for MAPC. They've been extremely busy at the moment working on different training modules specifically for disaster preparedness. And I've been actually involved with, which has been fun. I've been learning a lot and getting to see a lot of fellow colleagues in the preservation world across the country. With that said, they're looking at putting a virtual training, and they're looking at doing it in the fall. It would probably be 2 days. And that way you're not sitting in front of the Zoom for a whole day, probably about 3 hours for each. And I've been asked when we as a town would want to do that. I personally think that we would want to put it towards November, maybe even December, if that works for everybody. Again, this is all virtual, so it'll be a little bit easier instead of getting everybody physically to Nantucket. And then that's pretty much it on that regard.
I had a question, Holly. So with the virtual training, are they doing a bunch of those? I mean, you're going to ask everyone to, yeah, what are they doing now for training?
They're working with some of their, different camps that were scheduled prior to ours. Of course, we were supposed to have ours in May, but there were ones that were supposed to be done in March and April. And so they're working with them to create those training sessions virtually. Yep.
Well, I don't know, does anybody have any comment about the benefit of going ahead with getting a virtual training on the calendar, or?
I would like to propose in November, maybe come up with a mutual, I know we can't really, figure out right at the moment, but I'd like to respond back to NAPC and say, hey, Nantucket would like to have it in November. What works for them? Of course, that also is up to the availability of the trainers. Again, the virtual component is a little bit easier for everybody to handle.
Yeah. Well, I'm totally in favor of doing a virtual training. I mean, it's the world we're living in now. It has some advantages, and the training is really, really important. So certainly, I don't know how other people are feeling about that.
Yeah, no, this is Clement. I really want training. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Don. I would like early November if we could do it, just to stay away from the middle to end of November.
Absolutely.
I agree. I think it's not, obviously not as good as having the easy give and take of a real life thing. In the absence of being able to do that in real life, let's definitely do virtual as we can and make.
Okay, well, Holly, maybe you could come up with some dates that work for them and we could consider it at our next meeting. And I assume you'll also run that by the HTC.
Absolutely, yes. This is something that both commissioner bodies need to be involved with. And then, of course, then we can allow, the public and other preservation organizations that would want to participate be able to do so.
And about the municipal vulnerability study, just to refresh everybody's mind and just state clearly for the record that this is about guidelines for new construction or alterations that are in a floodplain. And I don't know how many folks monitor the conversations at the HDC, but there's all the time structures coming up in our historic district that have to deal with flood issues. And we're just kind of going along trying to do the best we can. And the work that Holly has done to consider formal guidelines and protecting the historic context and really have something that's proactive. That's what this municipal vulnerability study is all about. And we were just kicking it off in March and it all had to come to a grinding halt. So Holly, thank you for continuing to push it along. And will we be able to hear from people at the end of June 30th, as we had hoped?
Yeah, so the mutual organizational meeting that you all have planned with the Historic District Commission for June 30th is gonna incorporate a brief discussion with our consultants for the design guidelines. Yes. Fortunately, it's, of course, without having people to travel here, our lead person, consultant working on the design guidelines needs to physically be on Nantucket to be able to look and see what we have. And it's been difficult for him to do that. But again, we've been working on other aspects of the project. And yes, the HDC would, I don't want to speak for them, but as being involved with them for the past year or month and a half, I'd say, every week, those are some things that they definitely want to have, is that direction. And of course, this is something that Nantucket, working with resiliency is very important moving forward. There's so many components to it. And there's other places in the country that have been able to do a fantabulous job. Can't speak today. So yes, we are moving forward slowly. Of course, our schedules had to be impacted on a lot of different aspects of it, but this is something that we're finally got the go ahead from the state to extend the time frame. So yes, let's move forward with it.
In preparation for that meeting and participation in that discussion, I really recommend that everybody take a walk down to Brant Point. So if you're walking down Easton Street and you get to that area where there's that little turnaround circle, but like before the Coast Guard station, there's a new house that's been built there, elevated, and it's right next to an older house on Brant Point. And I just think it's there are many examples, but I'm saying that that's a useful thing to go see in thinking about how building is changing by the waterfront. Would you agree, Holly?
Yeah, and having those consistent guidelines, not just based on what their base flood elevation requires, but what actually makes sense for our historic district. And certain areas may need to be elevated higher than others, but looking at what our historic architecture has done and how we can blend it together. It's all, I think, all about moderation and consistency too.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions about the training or the MVP study before we move on to the update from the chair?
Because I wasn't at the meeting. Can you hear me?
Is that Tom? Yeah.
Because I wasn't at the last meeting and Holly was talking about the the meeting we're going to have along with the HDC on the 30th. Is there a time for that yet?
So we're going to get to that because we'll talk about that when we talk about the mission and goals of the NHC.
Okay.
Okay, so we have another agenda item. Oh, was there another question? We have another agenda item, which is the idea of a Nantucket Historical Commission Resource Board. So we have a few people on the call today: Fran Karkunen, Michael May, Marty Hilton, and Mary Bergman, who have joined because I'm floating the idea that we would have something I'm calling a resource board. If you go to the agenda packet, you can see, I'm just going to pull up my packet, a list of names. In addition to the people on the call today, also Betsy Tyler, Brian Pfeiffer, and Penn Austin.
And our own Michael May.
And Michael May is here on the call today. Yeah. So the idea here is, you know, our goal and what we're charged with as a historical commission is to be able to advocate for and talk about and research and identify what is historic about Nantucket. What are the historic resources on Nantucket, whether they be private structures, public spaces, ancestral lands, archaeological sites. And everyone on the commission is wonderful. We are who we are. We have the skills we have. But we're blessed on Nantucket to have an incredible community of people who are historians, who are deeply familiar with the structures on Nantucket, the people who lived in those structures, who are very familiar with planning, who are, we really have an embarrassment of riches of talented people here. And it just seemed to me that as we do more and more work commenting on the history and the historic assets, and as we start to move into what we'll cover when we talk about the mission and goals of the work that we're really charged with, it would be very helpful to have a group of people. It's not going to be everyone, obviously, and we're an open group. We want to hear from everybody, but could we designate some folks that would be willing to lend their brains, their body of knowledge to help us with our work. So it's an idea. I proposed these members, and I just wanted to float it. We've got some of these folks here today, and I just wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about this idea. I'd love to hear from everybody. So Holly, do you want to make a comment as our preservation planner about this idea and the
Sure.
board?
Yeah, I think it's great. I welcome it. I know pretty much everybody that is on this list, and I would feel very, very appreciative to take their knowledge and experience, and you know, it takes more than one person, I think, on this side of things, and to be able to have advocates in the world of preservation is very appreciative. So I take it all with open arms.
Great, thank you, Georgia.
In other words, I like the idea a lot. I'm wondering what the form of their advice would take. It's obviously ad hoc. Would you or somebody designated on the commission would contact the appropriate person when we thought their input would be helpful? Is it necessary? We don't even need to define that now, but I'm just curious about how you think we might bring them in for consultation purposes.
Well, yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's fluid. I do have one example of that. So when we get to our discussion point about the mission and goals, one of the things that I think we need to start is surveying and helping with with the definition and defining and archiving of what is historic. And so I actually did reach out to Fran to help with a specific example of what that might look like. Because there's been a discussion happening about a case that's in front of the HBC where they, I think, would benefit from some historic perspective being provided. So I reached out to Diane Coombs, who's the chair of the particular commission panel that is looking at this situation. And I asked if she would like to have some help with the history and historic discussion. She said, absolutely, you know, if you wanted to do that and Fran wanted to help, we would love to hear. So I asked Fran if she would, Fran, I don't know if you want to speak to this. We could save the discussion to when we get to the topic of our mission and goals, but it is in your in everybody's packet, what she wrote as an example. So that would be an example of how this group, if we have a question, if we have a need, if we need some help, we could go to this group, and that would be an example.
The other thing I'm thinking about is we had talked about calling in somebody who had particular engineering expertise with reconstructing sidewalks and historic bricks and that sort of thing. And that person is not on this suggested list of resources. Is that because you contemplate that we might be looking for a different kind of board that would give us financial resources to hire a particular professional? I mean, how do you see those different boards interacting?
So Georgia, that's actually the next discussion topic. Okay. So certainly, you know, there will always be a need to hire folks to help with as consultants. So I think the idea of the resource board is just to have people to have a standing committee who raise their hands and say, if you need advice, if you need perspective, we're here to help you. Yep. It also helps us because as we seek to become a certified local government, we need to be able to show the Massachusetts Historical Commission that we know what we're talking about and we have resources who know what they're doing.
Yep. Okay, my questions are done.
Tom?
Well, I also know most of these people, at least I know 5 of them. And I see that those 5 have all worked together or still do work together even today. I'm glad to see all the names on here. Of course, I also like to see Fran's on the committee. What she doesn't know about the history of what's going on around here isn't worth knowing. And I don't know how many people have read a lot of her books, but you certainly, you know, if you do have a chance to read some of them, you'll know what I'm talking about. Are these people that are on this list people that we're paying, or are these volunteers?
Well, at this point, it's a resource board to offer advice. Now, you know, there may be a need to hire people to do more work, and the town has specific bidding processes, and I would defer to Holly and probably Andrew about anything involving hiring that Plus or the Historical Commission or the HBC would be engaged with.
The reason I mention that is because what Georgia just said about that, I forget the gentleman's name, but you had brought him up several times in a couple of previous meetings, and I'm assuming we'll definitely be hiring that guy. But,
well, so he is being hired, but not by us.
Right.
Yeah. And we're going to get to that.
We're the ones that are going to bring that forward, though.
We're going to get to that, and we're going to be completely briefed and brought up to speed on that in the next agenda item.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Does anybody else, if you want to comment on the resource board, any other comments from the commissioners? I also want to mention, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, Hillary, this is Clement. I just wanted to say that, I mean, I think a resource board is a fabulous idea. Obviously, it does say volunteer, and they're professional and so well knowledgeable that we should be able to tap them at any time. I would love to see us, which I know you said you're going to talk about later, but to be in a position where if we wanted to hire them for further information, we could also do that. But I know you're talking about that next. So I think it's fabulous, and we also should not be limiting it just to these names if any other names come to the fore. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. And, you know, this is a start. Our resource board should be large. So I'm sure there are other people that, you know, I haven't mentioned or others haven't brought up. So I would invite anyone to write to Holly. Is it okay if I ask people to write to you if they want to?
Absolutely. That's fine.
If you want to be considered to be on this resource board, and, you know, Holly could introduce the idea to the commissioners and you can decide.
Mhm.
Hi, this is Angus. I just wanted to say that I think that it's a great resource board. We could always add, but the list that we have right now, I feel like everyone's knowledgeable and especially knowledgeable of Nantucket architecture and resources. So I think it is a great start for a resource board.
Do any of the members of the resource board want to say anything about it, or about? We're going to have lots of opportunity in our discussion of the mission and goals to hear from other people. But if you want to say anything about the resource board,
Why don't I see if I can do this? Hi, this is Fran. I'm not the only one, but often as over time, I thought, why didn't they ask one of us about that? And so serving on this resource board is a way of being on hand to be asked. I've served in a similar capacity for roads and right of way, and I'm a cemetery commissioner. And it's very gratifying to be asked about things where it's really possible to add some information. I kind of enjoyed the little bit that I did for you this week. But I really, I'm not going to serve on your commission because I'm a cemetery commissioner and we have a fairly big project right in front of us. And I think I can only handle one of these things, but I'm more than happy to help out with information about projects that you're working on.
fantastic. Well, do any other potential members of the resource board want to say anything at this point? You don't have to. Oh, Michael, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Got it.
I'm happy to volunteer, but I do think it's a great idea because there's a lot of knowledge on island, and sometimes boards work independently, and other people are doing work. So I think the more involvement you have from preservationists and historians, it makes sense. So I think it's a great idea.
Could I say, Hillary, Fran made a very good point. It's helpful for us to be able to ask for information or advice from our resource board. But it would also be great if they if they know what we're up to, what we're thinking about, if they simply felt free to comment. Because it might not occur to us what their expertise is or what their opinions are. And they might have opinions that would be useful and we wouldn't think to ask them for them. So I think it's useful for them to feel free to comment if they see something where they think that their input would be useful.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I could see, for instance, with this group that we would make a special effort to, obviously our meetings are always posted, our agendas and the packet is always posted, but to make a special effort to communicate and have good information flow. Okay, well, should we take a vote to adopt this as our initial slate of participants in the resource board? If I could have a motion.
I would like to make a motion that we adopt this slate to serve as at least our first board.
I'd like to second it.
Okay. Clement,
Aye.
Angus,
Aye.
Tom.
Aye.
Tom made the motion. You're voting on your motion. Mickey,
Aye.
David, David Silver.
Aye. Can you guys
Okay.
hear me?
And I'll ask our alternates as well, Ben and Don.
Yes, aye.
Okay, and I'm Hillary Rayport, aye. Terrific. Okay, so I'd like to move on to, well, I'd like to welcome Mary and Michael and Marty and Fran who are on the call. Thank you very much. And to everybody else who's not on the call, thanks as well. So moving on to the rehabilitation of the historic streets. So we had our meeting in February with the DPW. There was going to be an information session that was canceled. I have had some follow-up discussions with the DPW, and I would say I feel very positively about the communication, and I do feel that there's a genuine interest on the part of the town to take into account historic considerations. And they have specifically asked us for historic goals. Now, we presented historic goals, we first presented them in July, and we're just trying to get to a point where the goals are streamlined, but still meaningful. I have a hand raised from Don. Don, was there something you wanted to say?
No, I made a mistake.
Okay, you're figuring out how to use the hand raising. So one of the things that will inform the preservation goals, and also I think help us work with the DPW to reconcile differences of opinion about use of certain materials and approaches, is a preservation engineering study. And a couple of you brought this up earlier in our meeting. Georgia and Tom brought up the preservation engineer. So I began leading a project among a friends group, a neighbors group, to find a preservation engineer that could advise on the reconstruction of Main Street. And I want to let you all know that I've learned, because I've inquired, that anything that I do as far as activities with historic resources on Nantucket, I need to firmly have my town hat on. I can't also be representing a neighbors group or a friends group. It's a conflict of interest, because I need to be only representing the town. And this is true of all of us. When we act as commissioners, as regards our area of interest, we're special municipal employees, so it only extends to our area of interest, which is preservation. We have to only be representing the town. We can't also be representing another interest, even another nonprofit that we might happen to be on the board of. Something that is very clear in our ethics law in Massachusetts. So I am not organizing the effort to hire a preservation engineer, but there is another neighbor on Main Street, a resident on Main Street, who is Jeff Paddock. And Jeff is here to update us on this work. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Jeff Paddock.
Sure. Well, listen, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm entering on behalf of a number of residents a letter into the record, which I will summarize here for you. So thank you for the time. And as well, thank you for the ongoing efforts of this group, as well as the Department of Public Works and other town stakeholders who are, working so collaboratively across departments to find, the best outcome for Nantucket Streetscape. I'm humbly write and submit this in these difficult times that we're in, on this Zoom call. On behalf of a number of citizens who reside in the historic district who wish to offer assistance. The background here is that in the summer of 2018, a number of residents were briefed by the DPW on the developing plans for the residential section of Main Street. Everybody very much appreciated being consulted early. And soon after, there began a spontaneous brainstorming of ways that people could offer support. I think everybody recognized the importance of safety and compliance, cost and maintenance, but also felt that perhaps preservation considerations were being slightly overlooked in the early stages of the planning. And so an idea was conceived to search for best practices and to seek out additional experts who may have helped analogous communities with protected historic districts facing similar challenges to Nantucket. In the course of this search, a group of residents were introduced to an individual named Matthew Bronski from the engineering consultancy Simpson, Gumpertz, and Hager. Mr. Bronski began his engineering career in the late 80s as a highway engineer focused on the evaluation and design of highway pavings. But he developed an interest in historic preservation and went back to school getting a master's degree in historic preservation as well as architecture. And since completing those degrees for the past 25 years, Mr. Bronski has specialized in preservation engineering and leads the preservation technology practice at SGH, which is a national engineering firm headquartered here in Massachusetts. Mr. Bronski has unique experience in historic paving, including cobbles, sets, flags, slabs, and pavers, and has led many consulting projects that balance engineering considerations with preservation, often finding common ground and win-wins across stakeholder groups. In speaking with Mr. Bronski and briefing him on the challenges facing Nantucket around its historic streets, he offered that in similar circumstances, he had seen an upfront preservation engineering study be an effective tool in establishing a common fact base for the benefit of multiple stakeholder groups in planning and eventually implementing their plan. Such a study would have the following scope: site visit to Main Street and other streets in Nantucket for a day or more to meet with interested parties and stakeholders. For example, members of the Department of Public Works, members of this commission, the preservation planner, and others. Anyone, frankly, who wants to offer an opinion or provide insight, to review documents pertaining directly to the Nantucket streets and sidewalks over time, to conduct a literature search and review of available technical standards and guidelines for historic cobblestone paving from around the world, not limiting ourselves just to the US, but also looking at Europe, to develop an illustrative report and appendices that summarize findings, conclusions, and general recommendations. The report would specifically seek win-win solutions that maintain the historic character and fabric of the cobble paving while also addressing practical concerns such as safety, durability, low maintenance, etc. And the report would, of course, be available to share with all parties. Mr. Bronski and his team would be available to participate in follow-ups as required and discuss and answer any questions. And so it's on behalf of a group of interested residents who are by no means experts and don't purport to be so, that we wish to provide the funding for this independent study and expertise to the relevant town bodies, including this commission, as well as the Department of Public Works, for the benefit of deliberations and planning related to the rehabilitation of Nantucket's historic streets. We recognize that all parties are, of course, under no obligation to accept this gift, nor make yourselves available for input, but we nonetheless hope that all parties will receive it in the community and neighborly spirit in which it's intended and utilize and consider its findings. So that's the letter. Thank you for the consideration and for everybody's hard work on this topic and in setting such a leading example for collaboration in planning, conservation, and development. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, we are very fortunate that we have generous people in the community that wanted to source this information for us. I mean, I think it's going to be very important information. Before we open up to questions about the study, so what's going to happen when, how can we facilitate, what can we do as a commission, I just also want to mention that this isn't the only study that's happening for the streets. There's also a historic streetscape study that is a grant that was written by the Nantucket Preservation Trust and is going to pay for the Preservation Institute in Nantucket to do survey work. So of course, the other really important aspect of preserving our streets, other than understanding the materials and how to rehabilitate the streets, is understanding what is there and documenting what is there and where it is. Marty, do you want to say a little bit, or Mary, do you want to say a little bit about the historic streetscape study for the benefit of the commission?
Yeah, so this is Marty Hilton, the Director of Preservation Institute in Nantucket. We did, as Hillary stated, partner with the Nantucket Preservation Trust, as we've done in the past, on a number of projects, including the historic interiors. I think there's a number of different components to the grant, but I think the more important part is the documentation piece, but we can't really preserve what we don't know is there. So I think to thoroughly document, and not only in terms of digital documentation and drawings, but also, paving types and conditions. So I think it'll help form the basis to make some really good informed decisions. The proposed guidelines that were in the materials, I think, are great, but I think they could be expanded on and made even more specific depending on, the street or paving type. So we're really pleased to be able to work with the Historical Commission and Nantucket Preservation Trust on the project.
Great, and it is a CPC project, so the CPC has voted in favor of it at that level, and it will be actually voted at town meeting on the 25th of June. And then when would that start, Marty?
That's a good question. I actually have received permission from the University of Florida to travel to Nantucket for research purposes in July, but as of now, Hillary, the university is not allowing travel for students and researchers. So I think on June 23rd is when our Board of Governors for the state of Florida will issue guidelines for fall. So if we're able to travel, and I suspect we will be, then it would probably be September if you're talking about a June award. I might do some preliminary work this summer, but I think the majority of the data collection would need to occur in the fall.
Okay.
But I will keep you posted on the university's decision.
Holly, as our preservation planner, did you want to ask any questions about the timing, or, I mean, you're kind of a key liaison for Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I would want to know, with the current state that we're in right now, it's challenging to just do normal day-to-day work. So I would just want to get an idea of what his time frame would be. If this is something that's going to be within the next couple of months, or is this going to be something in the fall? I would just want to get an idea on that, because because as you know, my schedule is limited due to COVID, but I welcome it. I think this is great. I think it's fantastic that there's property owners who are excellent stewards of their property, understand what they have, and are willing to pay for something that's needed for Nantucket. So I welcome it. I think it's great.
Jeff, did Matthew say anything about when he'd want to come and have? We're partially reopened, so we can have socially distanced meetings of small groups. What's Matthew's thinking?
Yeah, so it's a great question. He is soft circling the middle of July, but he very much wants to make sure that people that want to meet with him are available to meet with him. So one of the first priorities is for me to take this offline to work through you, Hillary, to get the right people, making sure they're around, and that he'll come over then in July, aligned to that, especially to meet Rob as well, who's a key person that he wants to spend time with and hear from. And then he has plenty to do from desktop research between now and then. I would imagine that a report would be forthcoming around September. And if people have deadlines that are required, please just feed it in and we'll try our best to move him along.
Hillary, this is Marty. I just want to say from that standpoint, if I am there in July, I think it would be beneficial to liaison. And if indeed his report is issued in September, it seems really good timing with the start of our, what I project for the start of our project.
Okay.
Hi, Hillary. It's Abby Camp.
Hi, Abby.
How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here.
Just as a citizen, I'm thinking about, the top of Main Street before the Civil War Monument. The condition of the road is so bad. I don't even drive that corner anymore. I go all the way around Prospect to the, hospital and the high school. I appreciate the sensitivity with which you're going forward with repairing the road. Just think that maybe I'm a bit impatient, but is there a timeline that might happen that they might start recobbling the street?
I can speak to what I know about that, and Holly, please chime in. So the Department of Public Works is the authority that's responsible for repairing Main Street. I know they have funds, we're in a time of fiscal contraction, but I know that they have funds actually earmarked and set aside already that aren't going to get taken away, I don't think, for restoring, for returning cobbles, replacing loose cobbles for cobblestone repair. I don't know if you noticed, but so that part of all of that part of Main Street, the whole part that was dug up in the 2008-2009 sewer repair, is the part that has failed most dramatically. Whereas, all of cobblestone Main Street gets more or less equal truck traffic. There is a part that is in extreme failure, whereas other parts have held up. And I think that is, we'll wait and hear what Matthew says, but that would certainly lead one to conclude that there was something to do with the restoration of cobbles, and I use that term in a layman's sense, not a preservation sense, because I don't think we saw a restoration. But the way the road was recobbled in 2009, the way the bedding was prepared was different, and it's failed to a more extreme case. We also have a situation right outside Ray's Court where just in February, a contractor dug it up, an authorized contractor dug it up and hasn't even replaced the crosswalk. So we have the stone slabs, schist slabs stacked up against the foundation of a house. And we have piles of cobblestones and just a strip of dirt across the road. So there are many areas that need repair. And this is something that no one is, you know, this can be completed at any time. So restoring the cobbles, filling in the dirt, putting the cobbles back, it doesn't need a permit from the HDC. It doesn't need any permission from us. I mean, we're advisory. So I think we should ask if those funds are going to be expended, or if there's somebody that can at least make the road a little bit more drivable in the areas that are most stuck. And that would be a stopgap measure to a true restoration of the road. A true restoration of the road is going to involve, you know, the whole cobblestone system. It's going to be informed by this preservation engineering study, the research that Marty's doing. That's a longer term thing and more expensive and extensive thing. That's how I, having looked at it for a long time, that's kind of where I come out. Holly, do you want to opine?
Really, you know, as far as proposed work goes, I can't really speak to that, but my understanding is that DPW is really looking from us preservationists on what exactly they need to you know, be mindful for. They want to know what we consider, you know, needs to be protected, how it needs to be done, that kind of thing. And my understanding, things are pretty much on hold until that is done. I could be wrong, but I think that there's an understanding of the sensitivity of the area, the importance of Main Street, and not wanting to move forward until there's something that's been established from the preservation side of things, to a point where I believe that from discussions with the DPW director, you know, he's actually interested in learning more about preservation. He has interest in attending camp. He actually sent me an email a couple weeks ago asking if it's been rescheduled. So that's a good thing. That means that he's listening, he's willing to learn. And I think that we're at a great point to have something like this moving forward. I will say, you know, that there are individual emergencies that do come across. As a matter of fact, in the last couple of weeks, I've received requests via DPW from an applicant with emergencies where sewer is, you know, spewing. We need to get into the sidewalk. And yes, one of them was up on Main Street. I have to take it upon myself as the planner to take a look at it, understanding what exactly is a proposed work, where is it going, how are you putting it back? And that's on a triage, case-by-case basis. So I guess if you look at the entire study as a whole, it's needed. And they don't really want to move forward on anything without having this. So.
Well,
this is Angus. Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I think you brought up something that I hadn't really thought about. Is a temporary fix. There's no reason for us to have such treacherous street conditions for year after year, waiting for the whole street to properly be restored. This feels more like the DPW wanting to say, well, our hands are tied. We can't do anything until we have a whole plan. And a comprehensive plan makes total sense. But I mean, can't something temporary happen? And if the DPW is truly interested in learning the right technique, I mean, just for the areas that are worst in need between Pleasant Street and the Monument, why couldn't they enlist the aid of such great expertise that we have on the island of Penn Austin and other masons who could simply, one afternoon, show the DPW, whoever's going to be doing the work, this is what you do to lay the bed and lay the stones correctly, and just get those spots fixed so that they aren't so treacherous.
Madam Chair, I totally agree. I think pinpointing the major emergency spots like that corner of Pleasant and Main should be definitely sensitively done, but really should be looked at and be done as soon as possible, I think.
May I say something?
Oh, yeah. Who is this? If you could announce yourself.
Tom. Along with what Angus just said, and in backing up what Mrs. Camp is talking about, from the town side, the downtown side of Pleasant Street to where the yellow brick road meets the cobblestones is only 70 feet, even if that. And I don't see anything wrong with even using that, maybe even as a test area to see what Angus is talking about, and see what Penn or somebody else could really do there, and address what Mrs. Camp is talking about, and fix the thing, even if it's just for the time being. I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Everybody goes way to the left when they should be way over on the right by the bricks, just because there's such a pit there.
Yeah. It makes me think of, if you have a historic home that has been not well maintained and is falling in, chimney is falling in, there's debris falling. The first thing you do is stabilize the home, repair the dangerous elements in ways that are reversible, and then you make your plan about how you're really going to rehabilitate in the course.
Well, that's my point. If it's only 70 feet and we do have to take it back up, but it's still only 70 feet. I mean, it's not like all the way to the bank, I mean, it's doable. And I think the sooner we could address that, the better.
This is Mickey. I've got a sort of a similar comment about the sidewalks, which maybe is a little more complicated because of the different materials. But those are probably just as critical, maybe more critical, because it involves just pedestrian safety. And I don't know if that's something that can be addressed as a repair system, repair technique in specific locations or not. But I think that the public is getting a little impatient with the quality of the sidewalks in town.
Yeah, it does feel like we're at this point where the DPW is saying, well, give us the whole plan and we're not going to do anything until we have this preservation plan.
May I add something here?
Yeah. Sorry, if you could just identify, is this Clement?
Am I on? I can't tell.
Yeah, we can hear you. We just don't know who you are.
As these plans go forward for the sidewalks, there is a big fund of data that you shouldn't ignore. And that is that the Roads and Right-of-Way Commission has put a great deal of time in evaluating the condition of just about every stretch of sidewalk in the historic center. And it's available, and you should use it.
Yes, I have seen that, Fran, and that has been given to the DPW. Thank you. I'm wondering if we might, well, we have our draft guidelines. So, I mean, we've been asked to provide historic guidelines. We've consulted the available resources, the National Park Service standards, a wonderful publication from Ireland that talks about historic pavement, and some other cities and towns. We've put together these guidelines, which just state sort of minimum best historic preservation practices, which any work that is done has to be reversible. You want to preserve the material. You want to repair it when you don't want to replace it. You want to repair it. The guidelines are in our packet. I'm wondering if we might want to send, let the DPW and the town know that we certainly think wherever conditions are dangerous, they should be repaired in ways that are consistent with this guideline while we work towards a more comprehensive rehabilitation plan.
I completely agree, Madam Chair. They just try to, especially that corner of Pleasant and Main. It's really almost impassable.
Could I say something?
Sure, just
It's Michael May. I just wanted to say that I know what I was on the work study commission with the DPW. This was something that Penn Austin and everybody brought up right away. It's something that, has said over and over again. So, I mean, the person you really need to convince is Rod to get that done. And I don't know how you do that, but I think that's, it's just an issue that comes up every time I have a meeting about it or have heard about it. So it's not something new. It's just something that has been a real issue and a hurdle that we haven't been able to get past.
Maybe a letter from you, Hillary, and your preservation group here today to Rob, asking, where are we in fixing these roads, might start the conversation. Just a thought.
Okay, well, I think that makes sense. Holly, are you on board with the idea that, I don't know, Holly, maybe the letter should come from you. Or what do you think about the idea of expressing these sentiments that have been stated in this meeting?
Well, I'm sympathetic to the status of that area of Main Street and what it's like. But I have to put my town employee hat on and say that, I would think my colleague, the director of DPW, would want to have more of an understanding on what needs to be done. I get that this is on a triage standpoint, that we need to have, that section completed, but, you also got to think about the history, literally, of what he has been involved with working on anything historic downtown, and what happened when moving forward with a project that was done prior to him and all that. It's a slippery slope. I would think we would want to have, first of all, you've got these revised goals for the historic pavement. I would recommend having our preservation advisors give an input if they are so willing, and making sure that everybody is in agreement, commission's in agreement, and I would submit that in lieu of having the full study done, rather than saying, hey, what, where, why. I feel like if a letter is written, regardless of who it's from, asking why that section is not completed at this moment, I already know what the answer is going to be. He's waiting for preservation goals and objectives from this group. And I think there's a few commissioners that were on the sidewalk committee, along with myself, would probably agree. I put myself in the middle in a lot of it. As a staff member, as a preservationist, trying to find that middle ground between both sides. So it's a touchy subject, and I really think if we want to get a point across, not asking why isn't it done now, but trying to find a solution to it first.
Hillary, may I ask a question?
Is this, yeah, is that Tom?
Yes, it's Tom. I don't know if something happened at the last meeting. I've been at every meeting except the last one, but that's, I think, when we were talking about getting this guy on board who has a lot of expertise with streets and sidewalks. And what would be wrong if we do hire the guy and ask him to come up with appropriate underlayment materials for the for Upper Main Street? And
That's been done.
yeah, was that?
I mean, that is what Jeff's group has retained him and asked him to do that.
Okay.
He's proposing that he come in July, and that he would probably have a report by September. And I mean, I don't think the DPW is planning to rebuild Main Street like right now. So I think having a report by September is useful. And in the meantime, we have a useful guidance. Does anybody want to make any comment about our draft guidance? I mean, Marty, you said it's a good start. Is this something we could send to the DPW with a letter announcing, you know, that we're going to have additional information and we'd request a meeting in July?
Hillary, this is Don. I'm trying to put myself, as Holly said, in Rob's shoes and saying, well, if I do a repair now, I'm going to have to repay and do it twice. And town budget is a costly effect, particularly if I do it and it's not consistent with what we're asking for. So I think we ought to talk with Rob about saying, what's a low-cost repair you could do to at least fix that corner for the next 3 months while we finalize our guidelines, unless we're going to ask him to do what we have in the proposed guidelines in that area only, and say that's what we want. So I can understand Rob saying, well, if I do a temporary repair and it isn't exactly what you want, I have to tear it back out. What's that cost? How big of a repair is it? And so I would understand why I'd be reluctant to do something until he gets more directive from us. On the other hand, we can't be as directive as we want to be because we're waiting to finalize these guidelines and have the benefit of the consultant who's coming over and doing the report. So I think he's stuck between a rock and a hard place around exactly what to do. And if we're willing to say, look, take the low cost alternative, at least make it passable. And as soon as we have our guidelines and spend as little as possible, we'll make it a passable alternative for us until we can have the guidelines around replacing all of Main Street.
This is Tom. I understand what Don's saying, and I get where he's coming up from, where Holly and Rob would be coming from. Somewhere I read, I think in our packet, that you know, the cobblestones kind of start with the curbs, and that's what holds them in place. And Main Street in that location has sunken down so far now. Those cobblestone, those curbs are in some places 10 and 12 inches tall and canting into the street because there's really no dirt left holding them in place. And so if we were to get some advice from this gentleman and find out what it is that we really do want to do, I don't see what's wrong with you know, having him make a real proposal so that we take Rob right out of it. He'll know what to do, and let him do that 80 feet or whatever it is, so he doesn't have to do it again. And then we get people like me and Mrs. Camp and everybody else that complains about going through there, that you know, it's done, and we have something to show. And it also, that's where the sidewalks start, with the curbs. And to Mickey's point, up there is one of the worst parts of the sidewalks in town. And you might kill two birds with one stone, but it all starts, I think, with getting the information on what we want for a base.
Does anybody else want to comment on communication? Or I have some thoughts. I just want to hear from everyone.
This is Angus. I could add one more thing, just to build on everything that we've just said, is that we have set forth guidelines that preservationists use for restoring these stone streets and sidewalks. And I mean, shy of doing something that is irreversible, like filling the holes with blacktop or concrete, I mean, to throw in some dirt and put the stones back up, how long could that really take? How much would that really cost to make it a little bit more passable for the next 3, 4, 5 months until work is really able to be done in a more comprehensive way?
Well,
That's all.
yeah, I hear you. I think that's what Rob decides to do, and what the town decides to do as far as maintaining the streets is really, there's many factors that they'll consider, and they'll make that decision. I think our mandate is just to make sure that they don't do it in a way that harms the historic artifacts. And ideally that we help them with information, thanks to Jeff Haddock and his group helping us source it, so that they can actually do it in a way that's like befits a National Historic Landmark. I'd like to propose that that we get in touch with Rob and give him an update, let him know that we're looking at hopefully a meeting involving him in July, that we have these draft guidelines and the standard that, what is done would be irreversible and wouldn't harm the material that's there. But that we could also mention that, while we hope to have a final report in September, in the meantime, if he wanted to discuss temporary repairs to stabilize a situation that may even be dangerous, we would certainly support that and feel that it could be done in a way that was a precursor to any more extensive rehabilitation of the street and sidewalks. But so lay out a timeline, provide some alternatives he can take at his discretion, and present a philosophy of restoration.
Yeah. I agree with that, Hillary, if you don't mind my chiming in very late, and also suggesting that whatever he do be reversible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if anybody else wants to comment, please do. Otherwise, that's what we'll do. Holly, you agree, or anybody want to say anything?
I think that's a better course of action versus asking him why nothing's been done. I think that's not a good option. And I think everybody also needs to think about, as much as I think everybody in this country are trying to move forward in a normal direction, we're still dealing with pandemic issues, and we're still dealing with trying to, have life somewhat same way as it's been. And I know from on the government side of things, it's a little slow. Not everybody's in the office, not everybody's being able to work. And so, I know that there's lack of manpower, so to speak. And, I think that everything is on a triage. But I think updating DPW on where we stand, what direction we are going, is a good thing. And I think they would be receptive to that.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Thank you, Abby, for bringing that up, and everyone. And Jeff Haddock, we are going to be moving on to the discussion of the mission and goals. You're welcome to stay. But I just want to give a very special thank you to you and to the other individuals who are helping us. So thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hillary, I'm going to have to leave, but thank you.
Okay. Who was that?
And Michael.
Michael. Okay. Oh, Michael, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to the discussion of the mission and goals of the NHC. I am very excited to be able to talk about this with everyone. we formed our commission, we reinvigorated our commission and appointed our commission a year ago. And we did a lot of catch up. We did a lot of, responding to things that hadn't been responded to. We kind of got this reputation of being like all about the streets and the sidewalks and the signs. But in fact, what we are all about is protecting the historic assets of Nantucket. And I want to take a little bit of time to talk about our mission and to talk about some of the things that we might identify as goals for the next year, the next couple years. And when we got started, we didn't even have Holly. So I'd like to think that we helped advocate for the identifying and filling of a preservation planning role, which certainly we mentioned when we wrote about Milestone Road. And we're so grateful to the town and to Holly that we have a preservation planner now to liaise with, because we really would be nowhere without that. So I want to acknowledge that. The first thing on this agenda point is becoming a certified local government. So I think I would like to start there. Holly, do you want to share the presentation? I just want to talk a little bit about why. I mean, it sounds kind of technical. Oh, becoming a certified local government, it's not something that would get anybody jumping up and down and be like a big aspirational goal. But I think it's a useful framework. Holly, I'm seeing just your file tree. I'm not actually seeing the agenda.
Oh, you're not? Okay, hold on.
There you go.
Bear with me.
So while she gets that up, I'll just talk a little bit about it. So the certified local government designation is something that is given to local historical authorities by the National Park Service and the local historical commission. So it's a designation we apply for, and what it does is it gives us certain powers, and it also makes available certain funds to us. So it's a partnership. It was created under the National Historic Preservation Act, and it's a federal, state, and local partnership. I'm not going to go, you can read this, I'm not going to read this to you, but suffice it to say, there's 25 certified local governments in Massachusetts, and it's really kind of notable in a negative way that we are not a certified local government. Holly can attest to that. So I identified top 5 reasons to become a certified local government. We get access to grant money that's earmarked for CLGs. We get more access to the Mass Historical Commission technical expertise. One thing that's very exciting is that we actually can have more control over nominating areas, structures, buildings, lands, for inclusion in the National Registry. Hang on a second, I need to clear the room of children. Hold on.
I sympathize to that.
It's a little bit like in Harry Potter when they genome the garden. So, so anyway, so I don't know if you all know what the structures on Nantucket, which are on the National Register, but so we're a National Historic Landmark. I was really astonished to find out that I think we have maybe 4 or 5 structures on Nantucket that are on the National Register of Historic Places. And they're almost all lighthouses. We have more structures that are on the Massachusetts State Register of Historic Places, but we should have many, many more places based on just, our history in the abolition movement, our history in science and industry, and also just the people who built things first and persisted here. We have many, many stories. I was even thinking about Captain Pollock's house on the corner of Quince and Center Street. I mean, should that be a National Historic Landmark? featured in the creation of Moby Dick. So we would be able to have more control there. And there's just many reasons to become a certified local government. So Holly, can you skip ahead to what we need to do? We talked about the grants.
Obligations.
Sorry, the one that says, the page that has like the gap. This talks about the grants that are mostly for, the grants, by the way, are for surveys and planning. Then I had a page where I talked about what we're missing, the requirements. There we go.
There we go.
So we need a lot of the requirements. One of the things that had prevented us from even applying to be a certified local government is we didn't have a historical commission. We now have a historical commission. And when I say we partially have an adequate and qualified historic preservation review commission, the issue is we don't actually have a memorandum of understanding between the HDC and the NHC about who does what and how they work together. So that would be something, Tom, you had asked earlier about our upcoming joint meeting. So Holly and Andrew Vorst and I got together virtually, along with Kathy Flynn and Ray Pohl, and we talked about this. And then we decided to have a meeting with the HDC where I joined. No, I didn't join. They discussed this presentation amongst themselves, which led to the idea that we would have a joint meeting where we could talk about what we need to do to make this application become a CLG. And that meeting is going to be happening. I think it's already posted. Holly, when exactly is the meeting? Do you want to announce it?
June 30th.
June 30th, and their usual meeting time is 4 p.m., right?
4 p.m.?
4:30, I think.
4:30. So
with all of them, yeah.
And it's an organizational meeting of the HDC. And we're going to talk about how we work together and how we support one another. And hopefully it will lead to creating a memorandum of understanding about who does what, and being able to apply to be a CLG, which will allow us to landmark buildings, or at least propose them to be landmarked, and will allow us to apply for survey and planning grants that will further our ability to get done some of these goals that we think are so important in terms of surveying our historic assets.
Hillary,
Yeah.
Can I ask Holly a question? This is Tom.
Yeah.
I see that the 30th, Holly, is a Tuesday, and I think I don't know if these days they're meeting at 4:30 or 5, but is that going to be a regular one of their meetings, and we're just
No.
going to be a part of it?
No.
Or?
They have accepted that as an organizational meeting and a joint meeting with you all.
Okay.
Yep. There's not going to be any type of application before them.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I have asked both Hillary and the chair of the HDC, Mr. Ray Pohl, to have at least 2 aspects discussed, and that would be the certified local government as well as our MVP program that we'll have our consultants pop in for a little bit. That's pretty much it. We'll obviously be setting that agenda shortly, and then anything other discussions that the chairs would want to add, but it is a strict meeting between both bodies, and it's needed.
Either you or Hillary will be sending us out a little notation to remind us to.
Absolutely.
When the time comes. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
So I thought that we could use a little bit of time today just to get our minds kind of all on the same page and debate a little bit about, what does Nantucket need in a historical commission? And, there are definitions of what a historical commission does in Massachusetts, but every community is different, and Nantucket is more different than most. So we have to consider, what Nantucket really needs. So I went back in thinking about this, and I looked in the archive, the digital archive of the paper. And Holly, if you want to bring up that Inquirer and Mirror article from 2005. And I finally found this coverage of when the Historical Commission was proposed back in 2005, 15 years ago. And I read it and I was just sort of happy, but also it's a little devastating to see that all of these things that were needed at the time that led to the proposing of what was then called the Nantucket Archaeological and Preservation Commission, now is called the Historical Commission, they're kind of all still needed. And this was proposed by a staff member of the HDC, Aaron Markovich, who Holly knows, who has, he was the preservation planner, or that wasn't exactly his title, but he was working in a preservation capacity with preservation training, and he still works in the field. I think he moved to Maryland. And there was another, someone with a degree in architectural history named Mark Boyd, who was also on the staff of the HDC at the time. So the HDC actually had support of people like Holly at the time, but they felt that they still needed to do more. More surveying, more documentation and advocacy and communicating about what is historic and why is it historic. So I just would like, and then I also, Holly, can you pull up the description from the Mass Historical Commission about local historic commissions in Massachusetts? So this is the guidance from the Massachusetts Historical Commission, which is like the mothership in our state. And you can see this form, this is a Form B. So in other historical commissions, when whether it's a district or it's just a historic building and there's a demolition delay law in place in that district, the Historical Commission gets this Form B. This is, Holly, is this something we use on Nantucket for applications?
Currently, I mean, we have Form Bs done, yes, but the ones that we have on file, if they're not done by a local like NPT or somebody else, that they're old. Our surveys,
required, right?
Our surveys are from 1989, correct?
2011 too.
Yes. Yes.
Brian Pfeiffer did the last one in 2011, and he's the only person I know that we've had in Nantucket that's qualified to do it.
The update to the NHL, yes.
Yeah, so the update to the NHL, I'm really glad you brought that up. Our NHL status was updated. It was adopted in 2013. Brian was a consultant along with someone else, and that work was led by the Nantucket Preservation Trust and paid for with a grant from the CPC. I spent some time today reading that National Historic Landmark designation. It's fascinating.
Yes, it is.
Inspirational. And it's something everybody interested in Nantucket should know, and we should be reminded of it all the time. And it also covers buildings. Any building built before 1975 is considered contributing and is noted as being contributing. Everybody should read it. As far as this Form B, the last comprehensive survey of buildings on Nantucket was done in the 80s.
89.
So, in 89. So there are many buildings, not the historic landmark designation that just lists addresses and whether they're contributing or not, notwithstanding, that don't have updated surveys.
I disagree with that statement.
Part of my long rambling statement.
The 1989 survey was partially paid for by the Massachusetts Historical Society, as well as town funds and other money, but it only surveyed a very strict amount of places in Nantucket and buildings. And that was the reason for the 2011 survey. And I don't remember the woman's name who was originally assigned to do that survey, but she died in the middle of the survey, and that's how Brian Pfeiffer got involved in it. And they did a much more comprehensive survey of the entire island, specifically with the old historic district. But they did all the old houses all over the place: Quidnet, Nantucket, Sconset, you name it. And so I say that the 2011 survey is way more comprehensive than the 1989 one.
Correct, but I think what Hillary's referring to are the individual surveys that were done in 1989 by the HDC, the ones that people refer to when they provide survey documentation to the HDC. That's what needs to be done, and that's what we have.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to be honest with you, that's what we've put in. We as staff have put into town meeting warrant article for funding. I don't think that one's going to move forward because I think select board has done a real triage in what's going to move forward with town meeting, but that's a different topic. I say that to say this is we didn't have to do that. That becoming a certified local government would give us the authority to be able to apply for grants.
Right.
We can actually do and hire a consultant to do the work without having to put it on the taxpayers'
I agree with that 100%.
pocket.
Yep.
So that's another aspect of why becoming a certified local government would help.
I agree,
Yeah.
especially for what we're trying to do.
Yes. Sorry, Hillary.
No, thank you. That was so helpful and so much more detailed than what I would have been able to say. But yes, that is what I'm talking about with these inventory forms. And so I think it's really helpful just to look at that article about the vision and the need and say, you know what, it's still needed. And to look at this document about, you all have it in your packet, about what historical commissions are supposed to do, inventory forms. We have some inventory forms. They're sometimes not as complete as they should be, and they're not as comprehensive, they don't cover as much. Updated inventory forms. National Register nominations, they don't necessarily protect. I mean, we have a historic district, but if something is on the National Register, it gives it more prominence, more protection. And it's interpretive and educational and prestigious. Access to planning grants. I'm just going through this list from the MHC. The Section 106 review we know quite a lot about. Advising our municipal leaders, an important role. I would certainly put on our list of objectives regular updates to the select board. Demolition delay bylaws. You know, we're a historic district, so we don't need a demolition delay bylaw, but we really do need a policy and procedure about how we handle demolitions. And that might be something we work out with the HDC. A preservation plan. This is really the holy grail. One of the things that we did earlier in the month when we weren't able to meet is Holly and, Marty Hilton graciously set up a call with Ginny Wolf, the preservation planner of St. Augustine, Florida, which is another, a sister Preservation Institute to Nantucket's Preservation Institute. Mary Bergman also joined that call, and so did Holly Backus, and we talked about what it would mean to have a preservation plan and how we might get that done. Do you guys want to just sort of summarize that and some of the learnings or takeaways?
Well, I think that, this is Tom again, if the HDC has got so much on its plate with just architectural review and sightings and viewings and all the other stuff that comes before them. I see this board, if we ever really got involved in something like this, could take a huge load off of the HDC, which traditionally has been burdened with having to come up with some kind of a decision on some of these older properties and for whatever reasons, and we would have much more of a professional. I don't know what the word I'm looking for.
A historic outlet.
catalog group of houses to use as a basis for some of our decisions, or at least to go to and compare, and make some kind of a call, and help them out so that they don't have to do a lot of that. And I can see this being a very, very useful thing, not only for the HDC, but for the town, if we could do that.
Holly and Marty, can you say something about the preservation plan too, for further to Tom's remarks?
So I just wanted to mention, going back to the form, yes, most of them were done in 1989, but over the years, since MPT's been involved and since PIN has been involved, there are some forms that were done and submitted since 1989. So I just want that to be on the record. I've found quite a few, and when I was an intern at NPT, I also helped out with some too, as well.
Yeah. And to that point, the Sconset Trust is also active.
Yes, absolutely.
The group you should probably consult with.
But a preservation plan, I look back at yes, I went to school for preservation, but I've been an active planner for almost 14 years now, and planning is such a component of anywhere within this country, but having one for a National Historic Landmark should be imperative. And I think we could learn a lot from fellow places like St. Augustine that are very similar in many different aspects. Preservation planning is kind of going into resiliency planning as well, and being an island and having to deal with resiliency issues. We're at a pinnacle time, and I would highly recommend having to create a preservation plan on the list of objectives for this commission.
Thank you, Holly. Does anybody else want to comment?
Well, this is Marty, and I had made the suggestion and offered to set up that kind of Q&A with Jenny Wolf, the preservation planner and manager for St. Augustine. And I just want to also support what both Hillary and Holly have said. I think that there's a lot going on Nantucket, and a lot of different organizations and town agencies, including this one. And I think that a strategic planning process like this helps bring everyone together and establish some core common goals, over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. So anything that the Preservation Institute, Nantucket, and the University of Florida can do to support that effort, we will.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're really starting with even though it seems like we're behind when we look at an article with a vision from 15 years ago and it still doesn't exist, I do feel like we have a head start because of the very strong nonprofits and academic organizations we have on this island. Did anybody else want to say anything about this, about the planning and surveying?
Well, this is Clement. I just want to say that it seems sort of ridiculous that we're not that we've never done this before. So I just think we've got to become a certified local government. It seems like it's the next step. And maybe some of these, when you're talking about doing a professional survey, you're going to have to pay for it, and we could get the grants to do it. And I agree. We work with the HDC and talk to them about what we should be doing, what they are doing. And I agree they are overworked. So this to me would be just a no-brainer. We got to do it.
Okay. I want to just talk a little bit about some of the things on the bottom of this list of what is a historical commission put out by the Massachusetts Historical Commission. Similar names and different responsibilities. It says the Historical Commission is often confused with a local historic district commission and a historical society. It is important that you understand the difference between these three organizations. Local historical commissions are the official agents of municipal government responsible for community-wide historic preservation planning. Local historic district commissions are the review authority responsible for regulatory design review within designated local historic districts created through town meeting or city council vote. Note that in some communities with historic districts, the historical commission and the HDC are combined. That used to be the case in our town, but it's no longer the case. A historical society is a private, nonprofit organization, which often preserve local history through house museums, maintaining collections and records and public programs. So Nantucket has evolved in a different way than most of the historical commissions in Massachusetts. We were, along with Beacon Hill, the first. And we started out not as a commission, but as a district, and then gradually expanded that district so it was the whole island, and then it became a National Historic Landmark. But all along, the function of cataloging the history has been maintained by societies, the NHA, the NPT, and what you'll learn a lot about if you read our National Historic Landmark, or you're familiar with, if you read the National Historic Landmark, also the historical, what was Beinecke's group called?
Nantucket Historical Trust.
The Nantucket Historical Trust was started by Walter Beinecke. And they really played this sort of like a web role where they brought together planning, development, history, conservation. He also started the Conservation Foundation. It's an incredibly interesting history. And we as a commission, probably there's less of a need for us to do interpretation and to play an educational role. Historical commissions might maintain house museums, they might give tours, and I think a lot of that is done by the Preservation Trust and the NHA, and I don't think needs to be duplicated because they do a wonderful job of it, and we all, many of us are individual supporters of that, myself included. But I do want to bring up the idea that it can be confusing because there's so many different groups. I mean, we're confused ourselves, which is why we're having a meeting with the HCC to talk about who does what. And I had a wonderful idea brought to me by Estelle Stone. I hope Rita and Mary are still listening because I'd love to know what you think about this. So Estelle suggested that we might join together to mount an exhibit on the history of preservation on Nantucket and talk about all the different pieces, the different players, and if we're game, and if NPT was interested in being our partner in this, it might be something we would take to the NHA and ask if we could stage it, put it together and stage it in the archive building. And I thought it was a brilliant idea. I was very excited about it. After reading the NHL designation, I thought this is our roadmap. I mean, we just bring it to life with pictures and text. Estelle helped put together a wonderful exhibit on the Jewish community on Nantucket that was staged in the same gallery. It's called the Whitney Gallery. She told me, I think we should have an exhibit at the Whitney. I said, in New York? That was foolish. She means the Whitney Gallery here. And I just wondered what you all thought about that, if that might contribute to the community, if it might help tell the story, and if it might help clarify everybody and bring people together.
I think it sounds great.
I think that's a very fun project and it's typical Estelle idea. Great idea.
Yeah.
This is Angus. I think it's brilliant. I mean, it serves all the purposes that you just brought up.
Who brought it up?
Estelle Stone.
Excellent idea.
Well, and
I love it. I love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Because that would clarify too what, and after, of course, meeting with the HDC, that would clarify what everyone does and, you know, where you go for what would be perfect.
And what everyone has done, you know, all the roles that all the different the people in the organizations have done over the time. Like that could be a timeline. You could see the overlap of the organizations and the key players, and it just brings to life the whole idea of preservation. I think it makes sense for all of us.
Hillary, I just wanted, this is Marty. Since, you know, I've done a lot of research on Beinecke over the years, including going over 30 interviews with various people. And so I certainly would have a lot, I feel like, to contribute, at least when it came to the Beinecke era in that piece. There's a lot of information there. So.
That's perfect, Marty. That's a pivotal point, one of them.
Yeah. Yes. Mary and Rita, did you have any comment? I mean, certainly we hope to have your partnership if you were able to do this.
Yeah, we did an exhibit I'm just trying to remind myself of what we did with the NHA last year, because I know that NPT did an exhibit about architectural history with the NHA last year, so I would want to make sure that, which I have to tell you honestly, I was too busy to actually go see. So I don't know what the end result was, but I can go back and look through Michael's notes just to.
Yeah, that was more focused specifically on, oh, sorry, Mary.
Yeah. On architectural history and not the story of preservation.
Yeah, so it was much more, yeah, the different styles.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that could be interesting. I'd have to think about what kind of a timeline makes sense as to when that could be realistically done.
Well, Esteli is a force of nature, so I suggest we hitch our wagons to her star.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, because I think, you know, Marty and I talk about this a lot, how Nantucket, that, you know, our downtown, the story of Nantucket is not just a 17th or 18th century story. What we look at downtown is really a 19th century story, or 20th century story, excuse me, of what were people what did people in the 20th century think you know, mid-1800s whaling village looked like? That's what we walk around today. I think it's really interesting, especially at this point in our history, our country's history, to realize that the way we look at history and the stories that get told, you know, it's not objective. Museums are not objective. And I think it could be a very interesting topic.
Yeah, I did, this is Marty again. I would think this might be an opportunity. This is just my personal viewpoint, and I'm happy for people to sort of push back, but I feel like a lot of the 20th century resources maybe don't get as much as our attention as they deserve on Nantucket. And when we did our study last year for Resilient Nantucket, the study area was from Brant Point, the lighthouse, to basically you know, the Great Harbor Yacht Club, over 300 buildings. 75% of those, that's the core of our commercial downtown, right? That's the 75% were 20th century, and 45% were built, nearly 50 were built after 1945. They were Beinecke. So I think when people, you are visiting to some degree, you know, a whaling village, but it's really a whaling village that was kind of curated, as Mary said, in the middle of the 20th century. So I think that would be an interesting layer to this. And what are the future landmarks? As you said, Hillary, period of significance only goes up to 75. What should we be looking for to protect in the future?
I love that.
What I always found interesting was reflections of Nantucket as seen in the 1920s. I think about the parties given and the way that the Historical Association in its early years tried to reflect Nantucket history. It might have been inaccurate in some ways, but it was charming in its own way, and I think it's fun to look at visually. I think the Austin Strong era, that period of visually, that period would be interesting to look back at. I'm sure Esteli has that in mind as well.
Well, I think I'm hearing resounding enthusiasm and even sort of creative sparks happening. And I'd like to take this back to Esteli and tell her we love it and we want to keep working on it. And, you know, let's see how we can make it happen and who our partners might be to help us make it happen.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea. And maybe trying to figure out, you know, a timeline for the project, because, you know, I don't think it's something that needs to be rushed. And I think that that could be something that we could work over time. Why not shoot for next year's preservation month? Just an idea.
Yeah. That was what Esteli had thought as well.
Awesome. I like it. I really do. I think that's something that, you know, I think Marty hit the nail on the head, literally. People don't think of Nantucket outside of the whaling era. And there's so many aspects of Nantucket history, especially when we try to get back on the map as a tourist destination after the end of the whaling era. And that's such an important aspect. And, you know, that's the Victorian area, but look how many Victorians we don't have on Nantucket anymore. Look how many Victorians were actually demolished before we actually had a historic district. Look at some of the historic structures that were demolished when we—
But Beinecke demolished.
Yeah, right. Beinecke demolished. And I think back to, you know, my great grandfather. I usually have a photo of him behind me when he was 16-year-old guy trying to learn contracting on Nantucket. I bring that up because he ended up, you know, working for Beinecke with his own crew of about 50 guys back in the 50s and 60s. And that's such an aspect of Nantucket history that people don't really understand about. So I definitely agree. And I think it's a part of that fabric, and that goes back to the layers. Where are we preserving to? And that goes back down to our design guidelines and how important the update to the NHL was, because it included those eras that we've been tunnel visioning, so to speak. So I think this is great.
I want to thank you, Holly. That was beautifully said and very personal, and really appreciate it. I want to take that moment to pivot to another objective, because I know we're coming into the end of our meeting. We're not going to get cut off, are we, Holly? Okay. So another thing that I wanted to pull the group on is this idea of surveying and historic review. I think I heard resounding enthusiasm, obviously becoming a certified local government and start to work towards updating some of these forms and using the Plan B, and are having a dialogue with the HTC where they are the architectural planning and review authority and the permitting authority. We are advisory, but we advise on what's historic, and we have a dialogue with them. And are a resource to them. I mentioned earlier in the meeting that I had reached out to Diane Coombs about opportunities to provide some historic information and using our resource board to do that, and she was welcoming of it. And I included it in the packet. So there's been some ongoing discussion about a home at 121 Nantucket Road, and referring to it repeatedly as being in the cliff area, and lots of large homes in the cliff areas, and Widows Walk being very appropriate in the cliff area. It's not for us to decide if this home is appropriate or not, if the walk is appropriate or not. That is in the purview of the HTC, and they're very well qualified to determine that. But I think it is within the purview for us to provide information that's historically informed about context in different areas of Nantucket. And in the case of if it's a contributing structure, an older home, I think it's appropriate, if the HTC would like, or if we have the opportunity, that we might give some opinion working with Holly in an appropriate way about the contributing aspects of a structure. So this is one example that we might contribute to the discussion should it continue to come up at the HTC. This is still at the HTC. I don't want to debate anything about this house. I want to be very clear. I'm not having a discussion about this house. I'm having a discussion about the area and what we provide to the HDC. So this would be information that would help the HDC understand and the applicant understand the area outside of Sanford Farm, you know, what is its context historically. And it would also help understand the role of roof walks and what their role was then and what it is now. This is not about saying what is and isn't appropriate. That's the HDC's decision. So I'm suggesting that we might, obviously we're working towards organized surveys. That's a funded activity, excuse me. But in the meantime, using our resource board or work that Holly does, we can certainly help. And I wondered if it might be appropriate to weigh in when we as individuals feel it's warranted. Please let me know what you think. So for those of you on the phone, Holly is sharing the memo that's in the materials that Fran Cartooning prepared.
Terrific, very, so useful, Hillary. It's Georgia. I can't imagine anything more helpful for us or for our processes than to have this kind of input.
This is Angus. I just wanted to compliment Fran on what she wrote, and thank you for sharing it and including it in the packet today. I feel like this is really good information, and too often this sort of background and comprehensive look at an area is really not a part of the discussion when appropriateness is discussed in the HDC meeting. So I really appreciate this sort of addition to the information that people are considering.
Thank you, Angus. Holly, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to echo the fact that you know, this is definitely something that is appreciative. The area in which it's located. I will say this: I know that the advisory boards have always tried to provide as much information as possible. I as well. We try to work together on those, and I actually love it when our ideas and thoughts on a review of anything that goes in front of the HDC within a historic district or advisory area, where our opinions are matched, or we're providing similar information, but having this background documentation of the location is fantastic. There's only so much that can be done, and I think it's great.
I mean, I could see, well, we'll obviously work it out with the ATC, how to work together, how we might be able to support their assessments. That might take some time, but does anybody have any problem with the idea that we might, just raise our hand and say, listen, we'd like to, in our capacity, provide this information?
This is Don. I think it's great information, and we're looking at it through our eyes. I just want to make certain the HDC is looking at it as helpful, useful information, which I think they would, to help them make better decisions. So I think it's great.
I like the concept. If this is something that Fran and MPT and everybody else has listed as a advisory role, if this is something that they want to provide, I do like the aspect of keeping it within an area, kind of like how this is written in the site specific area, because it's not being targeted towards that particular property, but it's giving the overall history of the area, which is very important for them to take in consideration the context of whatever they're looking at. I can get into the specifics and nitty gritty of that if it's a historic structure, and the architectural aspect of it. But at the end of the day, I think having this overall history of that particular area is very important. And I think we're going to find out, that this is going to be needed in some areas. And maybe this is something that working with the advisory board, say for Nantucket or Tuckernut or something outside of just the core historic districts to work on. I know I would appreciate it reviewing stuff.
Holly, or Hillary, this is Mary Bergman. Can I make a comment to that point?
Yes.
As I've been thinking about just the island and also all of the different things that we have to appreciate on Nantucket, I feel like there are so many little neighborhoods where there are character defining features to the structures that are in those neighborhoods that you don't necessarily find in other areas of the island. So making up some sort of an inventory, if it's too much work to take on an inventory, updating the 1989 Form Bs right now, could we form, could people sit down and come up with, okay, well, what makes this Quidnet area different than Nantucket, than Sconset? And to try to list those features so that the new design is complementary to that.
Mary, I echo that. I think that's what this one piece of writing is. I feel like it's a layer that's missing from the guidelines. Building with Nantucket in mind is that too often there are areas that aren't treated with the specificity that they deserve, because they're all the different areas of the island, were used and inhabited differently.
And I also like to point out too that there are historic structures on Nantucket that are not in local historic districts. They're not downtown, that are not in Sconset. And I think, that's something that we on a case-by-case basis as staff try to make sure that they are reviewed. There's some on Pulpus Road. There's some on, I think in Vestal that are not actually included in the old historic district. So just to echo the point that there are certain areas. So Quidnet itself, in my personal opinion, would be a great location to have its own little district, its own little advisory board. And that's just me thinking way outside the box, but no, I agree. And I do want to take the time to just mention that, NPT has been fantastic. It's great to work with Rita and Mary and being able to say, hey, look, this is coming on the agenda. This is something that we want to have some more information, because my whole aspect of it is I like to give the commission as much information about a structure or an area as possible so that they can hopefully make a design review as best as appropriate.
Yeah.
And to your point, Holly, where you were talking about the forms that they're using now, and what I was saying about the 2011 survey, if the 2011 survey was not as comprehensive as everybody wants it to be, it certainly provides a pretty good list, at least up until that time, of a lot more historic places that we could add to that list with that new form, or that form that exists, and make it more comprehensive.
Absolutely. That NHL list, now granted it's almost 400 pages long.
Right.
Of course, not everything on there is listed as contributing, but that is an excellent resource, and I do look at it every day. So.
I wanted to ask a question about that. So I expected to be coming to this meeting having participated in an HDC appeal that was coming before the select board last Wednesday. But because of the meeting running late, and frankly, I think because the select board's like the least favorite thing to do in the world is to hear HDC appeals, they continued that discussion to the next week. And I spent a lot of time, I was not familiar with the property or the discussion, but I decided that I wanted to understand it. It's about a home, a new addition to a very tiny cottage where the addition would triple the size of the home in Wauwinet. And the reason why I wanted to look at it was because Wauwinet I just wanted to understand, is this about the character of Wauwinet, and how did the HDC pursue the idea of deciding if the structure was appropriate or not appropriate. But they continued the discussion, so I haven't had anything. I also posted all the meeting materials, so it's the discussion about this hearing is not, on our agenda. I thought it would all be in the past, but it is an opportunity to talk not really about that structure in particular, because I just want to say for the record, I think the HDC does an extraordinary job discharging their role of architectural design review. I think they're very diligent and they're very good at it, and it's an extremely difficult job to do. But I think there's an opportunity for us to comment on how they decide if this existing structure, especially in 20th century existing structure, is historic or not, and referring to the NHL. So I think this might be an example where this commission or the chair or another designated individual might make a statement about the contributing or not contributing nature of a structure, or just whether or not that was really examined.
This is Angus. My understanding of the Historic Structures Advisory Board was that if it was historic, that it would come before the advisory board. So Nantucket and Sconset have their own, but pretty much anything else, most of our work is in the core of downtown. But I thought anything that was historic out of it, and that would mean Quidnet, Wauwinet, outside of town, the Nantucket Road. Mickey, I think you've been on there longer than I have, but isn't that part of what should be coming to us? Like, I'm surprised that this is not something that was held or brought to the historic structures.
Yeah, it's Mickey. Yeah, I agree, Angus. It should be, and I think some of them have in the past. But I don't know, maybe Holly might know better why or how that's decided, which structures outside of the core district we get to review. I'm not sure how that process goes.
So there's, I don't know if you guys probably can't see this, but because I've got my background on, but I've got a list that staff has, which indicates all roads in the old historic district for review for the old advisory board, for Sconset advisory board, listing that not everything is located in the actually historic district, but is under their purview. And then Nantucket, and then of course all of Tuckernut. So yes, I most of the areas, yes, but I know specifically of historic structures that are on Pulpus Road that are not on your list. And those, I drive by them every day and when I go into town. And so those have always been on my mind of, is that something that needs to be taken consideration? And I can tell you, if those structures go before the HDC, at least you have staff that will review it through that triage review process, if that makes any sense. They're not in a historic district, they're not in an advisory location, but they're a historic structure. That was my only point. To that, we do have a list that both the HDC staff make sure that those applications go before the advisory boards.
Holly, it's Angus again. Maybe I had a misunderstanding of what came before historic structures, but is historic structures advisory board are they supposed to review, as I understood, everything that isn't already dealt with by Sconset or Nantucket? Anything else that's historic on the island that comes before the HTC?
I'm not.
It's just been yeah.
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I know Kathy would know about. She's my, go person. She's the gatekeeper, if you will. So I don't review unless she gives it to me. So on that point, this is our first non-public or non-YouTube live meeting, and our first non-regulatory board type meeting, and I hope to see that we can have the advisory boards meet digitally, virtually after this. That's up to the town admin, but hopefully we can move to that, and we'll be able to accommodate everybody's time so you guys can review, and it's not just me. So.
Holly, this is Clement. I just think that the HTC appreciates all information regardless of how they get it. I mean, I think they like to have the information to make their decisions. So I think any kind of an example of a historic structure or this historic area would be appreciated by them in their attempting to make their decisions. The only thing I'm thinking of in looking at this 121 Nantucket Road is for us, part of our commission is archaeological aspects. And it seems that this whole area is filled with archaeology. Not that we could add that to our survey of trying to find archaeological sites, or perhaps they're already surveyed and I just don't know it.
So Clement, we had an applicant, Susan Handy, and she is a trained archaeologist. So I'm really excited. I expect to have her as an alternate because I know that David and Georgia reapplied for their seats, and alternates have full participation. So I don't make the decisions, but I assume the select board will appoint her and probably appoint her as an alternate. But it'll be really, you make a really, really good point. And we don't, I mean, right now the process is that if a builder finds anything, they're supposed to report it. But is there something that we could do to assist in identifying, this is an area where you're likely to find something, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is what you should be on the lookout for? I think that's what you're saying. Right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I have a question, Holly. How does the HDC, Angus is saying, well, if it's historic, we're supposed to be reviewing it at the Historic Structures Advisory Board, no matter where it is, if it's not in another advisory board area. How do they decide, when Kathy does the triage, that it's something that should go? You said she has a list, and like this appeal that's happening, it's for a structure that actually, even though it's a mid-century structure, it is on the list of contributing structures in NHL. But it was determined to be not contributing by the HCC.
Right. I can't speak 100% on this particular project. I think it was, the whole review started either right when I became preservation planner and was more helping with you all in the planning board still. So I can't speak specifically for this project or this property, but I only know that the HDC has approved areas of where they want the advisory boards to review. We have a list. There they are. I just wanted to make the point that there are historic structures that, yes, they're on the NHL. Everything is listed on there, contributing, that are historic, that, because they're over 50 years old, that are not in a advisory area or local historic district. Case in point, and I brought this up to the chair and of the HTC, and I believe that they want to have a discussion on it, but I'll give you an example. Quidnet does not have its own there's a lot of historic structures in Quidnet. There was one that happened, I think prior, I can't think, these last few months have smushed together, but there was a proposal to a historic structure within Quidnet, within the core center, to be partially demoed and partially added on to. And I did a review because we knew it was old. Got some additional information about the history of Quidnet. NPT was very kind enough to dig up some information, and as preservation planner, I provided that to the HDC. That application is still pending. There have not been any revisions that I can remember in recent, but again, I just wanted to point out that there are donut holes of areas that have historic structures that people might not know about, that are not within an actual advisory area, not within a historic location. Does Quidnet need its own, or is that something that maybe Sconset can take on? And that was kind of a point of discussion that the HDC needs to have. And we did have it, I think, on an agenda at one point, but couldn't get to it. So my point is there are areas, and that's where we also look at the NHL. Again, I don't review without looking at that, in addition to all sorts of other documentation. Relying solely on just the HDC surveys is not sufficient, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, that is exactly what I was getting at, Holly. That it's not any particular example. It's just in general, how do we say, oh, well, if it's historic, it's supposed to be reviewed by this or that, and it's supposed to be considered, and not demolished. I think that is something that, especially as regards the update to the NHL, needs to have maybe a little bit more definition put around it, and maybe we can help with that and work with that with our organizational meeting at the end.
The update to the NHL was fantastic, and that's the starting point of updating our surveys. Again, people have this kind of eye set that there's only 2 historic districts. Yes, they know the entire island has purview to the HDC, but again, this also goes back to education and why I'm very, very adamant on making sure that we have the proper education for everybody, knowing and understanding the difference between a local historic district and the NHL and what that means. It's very important, and Nantucket is so unique. I think we would be a different island if we weren't at NHL, if we just had the 2 little local historic districts. But things happen, and I think that goes back to the history of preservation on Nantucket in general. Christian's Landing, and that was I think the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, in 1970. Nope, we want the entire island over the purview, done. So again, that plays a big role in what we do, and that's why Nantucket is the busiest historic district that I know of in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and trying to look to other historic districts on how they handle applications and how they are working digitally and all that fun stuff. It's a lot to try to make sure that we're doing it appropriately. I think the HDC, those commission members do a fantastic job day in, day out. There's a lot of applications, and they've had 5-hour Zoom meetings. Not all of them, but 5 hours is a long time.
It is. It really is. Well, I think what I'm hearing is that it's good that we're having this joint meeting, and that everyone is supportive of the idea of strengthening surveying, and that our role is being firmly in the camp of, is it historic? Why is it historic? Is it something that should be preserved? What aspects of it are contributing? That the identification of different areas, identifying their features, these sorts of things, including the archaeology, are all of utmost importance and absolutely within the intention of our enabling legislation, and should be part of our objectives. I'd love to hear from anyone about that.
No, I think as usual, you summed everything up, Hillary. You do that so well. Yeah, I think we're starting off, we're picking apart the pieces. I've got so many notes on today's meeting. I'm going to have to go back over and over them. And educating ourselves is a big part of this for me. And I look forward to the camp Zoom and all the other things that we've talked about today. So thank you so much for putting everything together.
Anybody else want to comment? I think we're getting to wrapping up. I know we're over time.
I think this was very productive, Hillary. I'm especially enamored of the volunteer resource group, and I like the idea, all of it, very productive. I think it was very helpful to become a local, certified local government, and this last discussion of how we could work with the HDC will be extremely helpful.
Great. Mickey or David, I'm just looking at people here. Angus, anybody who hasn't spoken want to say anything?
Mickey here. I think I'm impressed, Hillary. I think you've put together a great meeting, and I think I've been in favor of everything we've talked about so far. So well done.
Great, thank you.
This is Angus, ditto.
Great. Can we talk about when we're going to meet next? Because I'm so glad this meeting's recorded, because I'm going to go back and think about how to turn things that we discussed into some objectives. I took a stab at a revised mission statement because I think we need to update that. I know we're not going to be able to work on it, but I'll just read it to you quickly. So the current is the Nantucket Historical Commission is the local historic preservation and archaeology planning and advocacy agent. The NHC creates educational opportunities, creates plans for the preservation of Nantucket, advocates through the Board of Selectmen on issues of historic preservation, and oversees state requirements for archaeology. And my just straw man proposed, which I will read, but I will circulate, and maybe we can work on it and review the objectives at our next meeting, is the Nantucket Historical Commission is the local historic preservation and archaeology planning and advocacy agency. The NHC works with the Nantucket Historic District Commission, other Nantucket municipal and nonprofit preservation and conservation organizations, and the Massachusetts Historical Commission to survey and preserve Nantucket's historic assets. Nantucket is a National Historic Landmark whose contributing historic assets include not only the structures erected prior to 1975, but the setting and context of these structures, the American and Native American artifacts of Nantucket, and the special visual quality of Nantucket as expressed in the natural and built environment. The Nantucket Historical Commission advises the Select Board and other town commissions and boards on the preservation of Nantucket. Working with the town preservation planner and planning director, the NHC creates plans for the preservation of Nantucket, directs surveys of buildings and lands of archaeological and historic significance, and advocates through the Select Board on issues of historic preservation.
I think that's great. I would definitely circulate that for everybody to review and make comments on individually, and have it on the agenda for next time. On that note, though, Hillary, I just want to let the commission know that I can't schedule anything without running that by town admin first, because they're trying to direct everything with everything. There's other obviously advisory type of committees that need to meet, and they're excited to meet just like how you were. So I can't actually schedule anything, but I think maybe if we could get some ideas of what would work for you all, that would be great.
All the Fridays in July are 3, 10, 17, 24, 31.
Yeah, it seems like we like to meet on Fridays. Now we're meeting on Tuesday the 30th. Do we want to meet on Friday the 3rd. I mean, normally we'd never meet on July 3rd. I don't know if this year is different. Do we want to try to meet at 1 o'clock on Friday, July 3rd?
No, personally, Hillary, this is Don. I'm going to have a lot of, hopefully, guests, so I probably will not be available on the 3rd.
I'm thinking that too. I may be offshore on the 3rd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, do we want to meet on the 26th?
On the
Or do
20
we
what?
want to meet on the 10th?
10th? The 10th would be probably better.
Okay.
And that's July 10th.
Either,
Well, July 10th, if Holly can arrange it.
Yep. Okay.
And
But I
then, yeah,
I think this is Don. I think we ought to commit to looking at your proposed mission and some of the descriptors, and then be prepared to at least make certain we can come away from that meeting with our clear mission and perhaps our objectives.
I agree with that.
we feel like we need to meet to review that before we meet with the HPC.
Yeah.
If I may, I think it would be a good idea if, yes, for everybody to read it, make their comments, and then that way there can be an actual mission statement that's voted on, because you want to have that voted on.
So that would be the 26th of June.
Of June? June
That's the
26th.
film festival, not.
June 26th?
Not-
Is that what you're saying?
Yep, June 26th.
that's fine with me.
What is June 26th for?
Well, we're just saying, let's, instead of pushing our next meeting into July, let's meet June 26th, and then we'll have a chance to adopt a mission statement and adopt our objectives prior
Okay.
to the meeting.
What time? 1
o'clock. Is
1
one-
o'clock.
1 o'clock, yeah.
Okay, so what I will do is ask Erica if we can have June 26th at 1 o'clock and July 10th at 1 o'clock. Do you want them that close together or no?
Well, I think in this case, I think we're moving towards meeting on the 4th Friday of the month.
Okay.
But maybe in this case, since we want to debrief from our meeting with the HTC, we should try to have 2 meetings in a month. That's okay with everybody.
1 o'clock on the 26th is fine for me. It's Angus.
Okay, and then we would ask to meet again at 1 o'clock on the 10th.
And I will see what I can do.
Okay. Terrific. So we have our next 2 meetings pending verification of the Zoom room. If there are any other comments, please make them. Otherwise, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, I don't think we have to do a roll call to adjourn, so I'll just say thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank you, Hillary.
I also want to say I missed you. I missed you all. We had all these technical difficulties getting started, and we didn't get to do kind of the roundup of how everybody is. I hope you're all doing well in these dark days and difficult times, and I hope I get to see you in person soon.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Hillary.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.